Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're about to peel back the layers of one of the world's most famous and vibrant festivals, Raksha Bandhan. Now, if you've ever seen those colorful threads being tied around wrists and thought you knew exactly what it all meant, well, prepare to be completely surprised. Today, we're using historical records, ancient mythologies, and some seriously fascinating political history to uncover the true, deep origins of this incredible tradition. So let me ask you this right off the bat. Is Raksha Bandhan just for siblings? If you look at how we celebrate today, you'd probably say, well, yeah, obviously. Today, it's almost exclusively seen as this beautiful celebration of the brother-sister bond. A sister ties a Rakhi on her brother's wrist, and he promises to protect her, right? But as it turns out, history tells a wildly different story. Okay, let's dive into this. Our modern view focuses almost entirely on that sibling bond. But historically, this festival began as a universal protective charm. It wasn't restricted to siblings at all. It was a universal vow of protection, an ancient amulet meant to ward off evil and basically seal a promise of guardianship between literally any two people. Get this, according to historical researchers like Rashishwati DVG and the Shaktitwa organization, this strict shift to a predominantly brother-sister ritual is actually incredibly recent in the grand scheme of things. They report that this modern interpretation really only solidified over the last 500 to 600 years. So for thousands of years before that, the Rakhi served a vastly different purpose. Section 1. The Ancient Foundation, Raksha Sutra. Back in the day, what we now call a Rakhi was actually a Raksha Sutra. This was an ancient apotropaic charm, basically a protective amulet used for spiritual blessings and vows of mutual protection. In ancient times, this wasn't just a fun family tradition you did once a year. It was a deeply spiritual tool. It represented a vow taken between any two individuals where one actively pledges to protect the other from harm. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how universal that protection was. I mean, according to the Narad Purana, spiritual gurus would tie Raksha Sutras to their disciples at the very start of their Vedic studies on the full moon day of Shravana. This bound the disciple to a life of learning, while the guru provided spiritual guardianship. It didn't stop there, though. We see wives tying them to husbands before they marched off to war, and even everyday citizens tying them to their kings to ensure security and prosperity for the whole kingdom. Moving to Section 2, the first Rakhi, a spousal shield. Picture this. Mythology describes a fierce, literally world-shaking battle between the Devas, the gods, and the Asuras, the demons. The king of the gods, Lord Indra, was suffering some really severe setbacks and facing terrifying defeat at the hands of the demon king, identified in texts as Vritra, or Bali. The divine realm was essentially on the brink of absolute collapse. So a terrified Lord Indra goes to consult his guru, Brihaspati, who recommends the ritual of Raksha Bandhan. But here's the fascinating part. It wasn't a sister who stepped up to save him. It was his wife. Sachi Devi, who's also known as Indrani, prepared this incredibly sacred, mantra-empowered thread. She tied this divine shield around her husband's wrist on Shravana Purnima, and historical sources like Amrita Puri and the Sri Bharatiya Mandal point out that it was this powerful spousal protection that actually granted him ultimate victory and safety. Which brings us to Section 3, the epic sibling shift. So when did the sibling dynamic finally take over? Well, the transition of this festival to sibling relationships is famously captured in one of India's absolute greatest epics, the Mahabharata. The legend of Lord Krishna and Draupadi is essentially what cemented that brother-sister bond deep into the cultural consciousness. So the crucial point is exactly how this particular bond was formed. During an event, Lord Krishna suffers a severe injury to his finger, and it starts bleeding profusely. While everyone else is running around frantically trying to fetch bandages, Draupadi doesn't even hesitate. She takes immediate, completely selfless action and literally tears a strip off her own sacred silk sari to bind his wound. Lord Krishna is profoundly moved by this gesture. Right then and there, he declares her his sister and pledges eternal protection to her. And the fulfillment of that pledge is known as the divine return, or Vastraharan. Years later, when the Kauravas attempted to publicly humiliate Draupadi by stripping her sari in the royal court, Krishna honored his vow. He magically made her sari infinite and endless, entirely safeguarding her honor. This powerful mythological narrative, as detailed by sources like the Boston Public Library, is really what permanently linked the protective thread with the fierce devotion of a brother protecting a sister. All right, Section 4, the historical twist, political unity. Let's move to and see how this builds. We started in the Vedic era with spiritual gurus and spouses, transitioned right through the epic era with Krishna and Draupadi cementing the sibling bond. And now, we're fast-forwarding to the year 1905 during the British rule of India to focus on a massive historical event known as the Bengal Partition. In 1905, the British Viceroy, Lord Curzon, decreed the Partition of Bengal. The goal was to divide the Hindu-majority West Bengal from the Muslim-majority East Bengal. This was a classic textbook application of the divide-and-rule strategy, implemented by the British administration specifically to create a communal divide and put a stop to the rising nationalist sentiments spreading across the region. But the people of Bengal weren't just going to accept this division quietly. The legendary poet and philosopher Rabindranath Tagore stepped in and brilliantly repurposed the traditional Rakhi. To counter the communal division on October 16, 1905, which was the very day the partition took effect, Tagore basically weaponized this ancient festival, turning it into a powerful, secular tool of political resistance. Now, what's really interesting about this is how Tagore completely redefined the thread for the modern era. He urged the masses to use the Rakhi as a, quote, symbol of undivided brotherhood and collective protection against British rule. In an absolutely incredible display of the Swadeshi movement, thousands upon thousands of Hindus and Muslims marched through the streets in Kolkata, Dhaka, and Sylhet. And they weren't tying these threads on just their siblings. They were tying Rakhi threads on each other's wrists as a testament to their unbreakable communal harmony and shared destiny. It's just an amazing historical moment. Finally, Section 5, the true meaning of Rakhi. And I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Who is your vow of protection really meant for? We've seen today that Raksha Bandhan started as a spiritual bond between gurus and students. It was a wife's magical shield for her husband in battle. It evolved into an epic, unbreakable promise between a brother and sister. And it even became a revolutionary tool to unite millions of people of different faiths against oppression. So the next time you think about this beautiful tradition, remember that it has always been a universal, unbroken vow of protection. One that doesn't just have to be for your sibling, but can genuinely extend to anyone in your community who you vow to keep safe. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this changes how you view this ancient, powerful tradition. Looking at these colorful threads and ritual powders laid out today, the story seems incredibly simple. Raksha Bandhan is a celebration of family. It's the time of year when sisters tie ornate bracelets around their brothers' wrists, exchange sweets, and celebrate the sibling bond. But that domestic picture only accounts for a fraction of this tradition's history. For the vast majority of its existence, this ritual had absolutely nothing to do with brothers and sisters. Instead, the roots of this thread run straight through the center of ancient battlefields and massive anti-colonial uprisings. If we strip away the last 5 or 6 centuries of practice, we get to the literal translation of Raksha Bandhan, the tie of protection. And that forces a much larger question. If this piece of string is actually a shield, what exactly was it originally designed to protect against? To find the historical baseline for this tradition, we have to look deep into ancient Vedic texts, specifically the Bhavishya and Narad Puranas. Here, we find the practice of the Raksha Sutra. This was an evil warding charm designed as a universal vow of safeguarding between any two people. Priests tied it to their disciples to signify spiritual initiation, and wives tied it to their warrior husbands before sending them to the front lines. The foundational mythological origin story of this practice takes place during a catastrophic war between the gods and the demons. Lord Indra, the king of the gods, was suffering severe setbacks and staring down an imminent defeat. The solution to his downfall did not come from a brother or sister. It came from his wife, Sachi. Sachi prepared a sacred thread, empowered it with specific mantras, and tied it directly to Indra's wrist to serve as a divine armor. Equipped with this localized protective force, Indra returned to the fight, shattered the demon forces, and secured a total victory. At its inception, this thread was a literal survival tool. Its earliest function was entirely about spousal and societal protection, proving that the original intent was heavily detached from modern sibling affection.
The pivot toward the sibling dynamic took root primarily over the last 500 to 600 years, anchored by a famous sequence in the epic Mahabharata. According to the text, Lord Krishna suffered an injury that left his finger bleeding heavily. The onlookers panicked, scrambling in all directions to fetch medical supplies. Draupadi bypassed the panic entirely. She instantly tore a strip of fabric from her own sacred silk sari and bound it tightly around Krishna's bleeding wound. Deeply moved by how quickly she sacrificed something so valuable for his well-being, Krishna officially declared Draupadi his sister. In return, he pledged to offer her eternal protection whenever she was in need. Years later, he made good on that vow. When political enemies attempted to publicly humiliate Draupadi by stripping her sari in the royal court, Krishna intervened, magically making the fabric endless to safeguard her honor. Through this specific exchange, the function of the thread pivots. It moves from a physical shield of war into a moral shield of honor, cementing the divine pledge of brother-sister guardianship that defines the festival today. By 1905, that mythological concept of guardianship crashed directly into documented, hard geopolitical history. This is British Viceroy Lord Curzon, and that year he issued a highly controversial decree to partition the entire province of Bengal. As you can see in this diagram, the strategy was classic imperial division. By legally separating Hindu-majority areas in the west from Muslim-majority areas in the east, the British Empire aimed to fracture the rising tide of Indian nationalist unity. The intellectual counterforce to this decree came from poet and philosopher Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore understood the deep psychological weight of the ancient Raksha Sutra, and he saw a way to weaponize it. He urged citizens to take this domestic sibling tradition completely out of their homes and into public square as an act of open civil defiance. On October 16, 1905, the exact day the partition took effect, thousands of Hindus and Muslims marched shoulder to shoulder through the streets. They tied Rakhis onto each other's wrists as a public pledge of unbreakable cross-cultural brotherhood. Tagore successfully repurposed a simple string, transforming an ancient protective charm into a mass political shield against the greatest empire on earth. Looking at the act of tying this jeweled thread today, you can observe the ritual through an entirely different lens. It functions as a family tradition, while simultaneously carrying the specific echoes of ancient war rooms, royal vows of honor, and massive anti-colonial defiance. The true weight of Raksha Bandhan doesn't depend on who is tying the knot. Its power lies entirely in the universal promise attached to the fabric. Whether it is deployed against a mythological army, societal injustice, or an imperial division, this thread remains humanity's most adaptable symbol of a singular vow. We are bound together, and I will protect you.